iama. I am Michelle Burrows, civil rights attorney who has spent the last 30 years suing police and prisons for abuse of force and the mistreatment of people. Hi everyone. I'm Michelle Burrows, a civil rights attorney based out of Portland, Oregon. I've spent the last 30 years suing police departments, and the prison systems for widespread abuse of people and misuse of power. I'm well known for cases like Anstead v. State of Oregon, a prisoner class action for the non-treatment of hepatitis C in the Oregon prison system. As a result, we entered into a stipulated agreement which enforced new standards and protocols for the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of Hep C in the prison systems. The outcome also included a multi-year monitoring system with a federal supervisory judge to verify that the parties followed through. Another important landmark case for Oregon was Cady v. City of Sandy and Clackamas County, where two officers tased and shot Mr. Fred Cady in the back multiple times while he was naked, covered in third-degree burns, and looking for help after his car caught fire through mechanical failure. The law firm of Jerry Spence approached me to be local counsel, where we won a substantial settlement and were able to change the scope of what constitutes lethal force in Oregon. This case was fundamental in classifying tasers as lethal force in the state of Oregon and was instrumental in changing public perception of use of force in Oregon. More recently I represented Lisa Dunn v. City of Eugene for systematic rape, abuse, and kidnapping by an on-duty police officer over the course of 5 years. The city police department ignored the indiscretions and allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. We sued and won. The officer was sentenced to 90 years and Lisa was monetarily compensated, although that won't make up for years of abuse. My son is helping me with this AMA because I don't know how to use the internet. Can you compare the conditions at private prisons to state-run prisons? I think having for-profit prisons is one reason we are so over-incarcerated. This is a complicated question. The government has the legal obligation to provide humane and safe conditions of confinement. They cannot discharge this duty by using a private provider. This duty includes safe housing, medical care, and personal safety for everyone. Many governments bought into the pitch by private companies that they could provide incarceration for the government affordably. Private prisons are run by large corporate conglomerates. Their goal is to make money at any expense to the prisoner. These private companies bid on providing jail services to local governments and sometimes state governments at a flat contract price, for a multi-year contract. For example, a local county jail might contract with CND for medical care in jail and promise to provide standard of care medical services for a flat rate for the term of the contract. What happens is that the private provider cuts corners and stops providing services because these contracts let the contractor keep the unspent funds at the end of the contract term. So the less they spend, the more they make. The consequence is that they hire correction officers, COs, with no experience, with very little background checks, who have engaged in some of the most horrendous abuse of prisoners I've read about. Private providers also do not allow prisoners to have expensive medical tests or evaluations, and oftentimes medication. Private providers are still obligated to meet the 8th Amendment standards on incarceration for prisoners and can be sued as a quasi-government entity for failure to provide humane and safe conditions of confinement. My opinion as to why we are over-incarcerated rests in the history of mandatory minimum sentencing, 3 strikes laws, incarcerating for non-violent crimes at very high rates, criminalizing addiction, and the proliferation of prosecutors who are allowed to have too much control over sentencing. The solution? Get rid of private prisons and jails. The incentive systems are flawed in that there's no incentive to reduce prison population. It's as cheap to incarcerate one as it is a million. Repeal all mandatory sentencing measures as the feds did. Repeal all 3 strikes laws. Use alternative processes for drug crimes such as drug court and treatment programs. Do no prosecute mentally ill folks, try to achieve hospitalization and medical care instead of jail. Decriminalize or reduce criminality of low-level property crimes. And incentivize rehabilitation instead of punishment. Introduce programs such as education and jobs training into prisons, because 90% of all folks who are incarcerated are going to be released. And finally, I would recommend removing the stigma for housing, jobs, and voting for those who have been convicted of felony crimes. The inability to get a job or housing after release removes hope from those who have been incarcerated and takes away their incentive to become a functioning member of society. Is it worth it, what you do? Do you have enough successes to make up for the emotional, mental toll of what you see? No? I had wanted to go into law, but my first instructor, undergrad, told me very bluntly that doing what she did, prosecutor, takes a massive emotional strength to get through some of the things you will become aware of. Do you get paid? I know this is a very stupid question, but I was wondering who funds help like you provide. Thank you for the work that you do. Do heroes all have capes? I see this question as a bit of respite from answering questions about the cases I see. Thank you for asking. This work is not for everyone, I admit it. Sometimes I don't even think it's for me. A longtime friend of mine, a fabulous and stunningly good lawyer, just quit. He can't do it anymore. The desire to do good and make change is often greater than one's ability to do it. One famous lawyer in Seattle told me that I do God's work. I believe the work is so very important, as we have seen these last few years watching the police go crazy. If not us, then who? I think I am reaching the end of my capacity to do this work. It is hard and it does build up. I work with other lawyers a lot, I am teaching some, I am writing more, and I'm hoping that younger lawyers will be interested enough to pick this up. I'll give you any briefing, depositions, research and whatever knowledge I have to help. I'll whisper in your ear and wave my magic wand. I do switch between prison and police work when one gets too overwhelming. I just wrapped up 10 rape, sex abuse cases in the women's prison against a prison nurse. That took a lot out of me, so I'll do a couple of police cases for a while. I've read stories on Reddit about activists/whistleblowers/journalists getting harassed by the police after being exposed, that is, getting on their list. Seems like someone who sues them for a living would get treated pretty poorly. Have you ever experienced retribution from police? I have been stopped randomly by police in small towns and told to watch myself. I had an officer draw a weapon in a deposition. I've been frisk-searched for no particular reason, more than once. There is not a name I have not been called. I've had to walk into rooms where departments posted armed officers outside while we were doing depositions. These are not acts of retribution, but are intimidation and bullying tactics meant to scare and discourage anyone who challenges the police. This conduct scares a lot of lawyers. It's why many lawyers don't practice this kind of law. For me, it fires me up. FM. If a citizen sees a cop harming someone, what can they do? This question has been on my mind a lot lately. Interesting you should ask. I just wrote a protester manual dealing with this issue. Number 1, don't interfere with the officer in any way. If he is making a legitimate arrest, you could be charged with interfering with a police officer. And in fact, you will be if you try to interject yourself. Number 2, if you fail the attitude test, you're probably going to get arrested. It will be bullshit and a night in jail sucks regardless of your innocence. Number 3, even if it is an unlawful arrest in most states, you only have the right to resist if you are protecting yourself or your life. Even if you don't resist, they may use excessive force and unfortunately you may get hurt. Which is why it's important that all police encounters be videotapes. You more or less should not or cannot do anything in the moment. Your only real option is to seek recourse after the fact. Number 4. Let the officers know that you're the watching and videotaping. I think that when officers know that they're being videotaped, they will address their behavior. But as we've seen the last 2 weeks, hundreds of police encounters are being videotaped in every major city, and that caution that police normally display is gone. They seem to have given up and just said F it. This is unusual. This is really the first time that in America that mass protests have been documented in real time and posted for the world to see. I get the sense that the longer the protests have gone on, the angrier and more entrenched in their defensive positions the police have gotten. Hence you see the calls for defunding the police. Number 5. Make sure people know where you are in case you get arrested. The police will take your cell phone from you and you may not ever get it back. So password protect it. Please password protect it. They cannot get into your phone without a warrant. A password ensures this. Number 6. If you are arrested you'll be handcuffed, all your property will be taken from you, and you will be put in custody for a period of time. Don't mouth off to the police, don't make it worse. Don't talk to the police. Exercise your right to be quiet. Try to let someone know you've been arrested in whatever way you can. If you are hurt, ask someone to take pictures of your injuries right away and try to make it to the hospital as soon as possible. The hospital will A. Make sure you're okay, and B. Provide additional official documentation of your injuries. Number 6. If the police are shooting less lethal weapons, stay out of the way. I represented a gentleman who had his testicles shot off by a rubber bullet. In his words, I'm your Uniballer case. This was not a great experience, even though it was less than lethal. Less lethal can still kill. Police are taught not to shoot in the chest or head for that reason, but they miss. It's no longer one victim, one city, one cop. It's now the entire country, thousands of victims, and thousands of cops. Which indicates to me a systemic problem with law enforcement methods today. In your opinion, how does the system remain so broken after years and years of talking about this stuff? Is it controlling interests or simply turning a blind eye? Really good question. I would honestly tear it all down and start over. It remains broken because there's big money in law enforcement, including providing equipment to each officer. For example, Taser, now Axon, worked for years to get Tasers on every officer and expensive training for each officer to be redone every 2 years. Now Axon is selling the uniform-based video system they want all police departments to buy, and the expensive cloud-based video storage capabilities. Each officer is required to carry a sidearm and some departments only allow them to carry one particular brand. Most departments have AR-15s for sniper shooting and the officers must be certified and trained on that. All of that riot gear you see cops wearing? Probably equals thousands of dollars per officer. Each one of these devices requires training, sometimes they go to Las Vegas and other venues on government dollars. I'm not criticizing well-trained officers or even a lot of the equipment that they have. But departments don't need all of the toys. And they're choosing training that emphasizes shoot to kill or shoot until the threat stops. This mentality has produced a fear-based system in politicians. Well-armed cops are a sales tool for politicians. If we don't arm our cops, we're gonna have thugs overtaking our city. Look at all pretty uniforms and shiny weapons that we're going to use to protect you, and that's the lie. Instead of addressing problems like poverty, addiction, and mental health, we're throwing people in jail or killing them. In my 30-some years, including some representing cops, I have found that cops are uniformly racist. I don't know if that's the egg or the chicken. They primarily arrest people of color, and so it reinforces a belief that color causes crime. And that's bullshit. Most cops do not have college education, have rarely traveled outside of where they work, most are white, and there is a fundamental groupthink in police departments. You do not snitch on a fellow cop. If you do, you become ostracized, and cops retaliate better than any other group on the planet. Succinctly, the monetary incentive, racism, and groupthink contribute. But also, as social and financial disparity grow, so do our social problems, and we're asking police officers to be cops, social workers, mental health workers, and fix everything. We need to well-fund addiction treatment, mental health housing, pay to get our kids educated in schools, and really look at the root of the problem. The wealthy really don't want to pay for the poor. I've heard that one of the biggest problems with getting depositions from police officers is that numerous police officers will coordinate to get their story straight before any kind of deposition. How serious a problem is that in your work? I start each case hoping the police will tell the truth, that they will man up and take responsibility for their actions. Honestly, 9 of 10 of my clients just want some acknowledgement of the wrongdoing and an apology. But law enforcement closes ranks when they are sued. They get together, compare their memories of the event. Sometimes there is a grand jury in Oregon, as in many states grand jury proceedings are secret. The Multnomah County DA convenes a grand jury for all police shooting death cases and publicizes the transcript. In every use of force case in the larger departments I see use of force reviews. In shooting cases there is a criminal investigation by a multi-agency team of detectives and a shooting review board. The agency always posts official press releases. Sometimes the police post something about the shooting on social media. Sometimes old girlfriends have filed domestic violence claims, or ex-wives will put information in the dissolution proceeding. I always hire and use a forensic reconstructionist and usually a pathologist in death cases. I have used blood spatter experts, firearms experts and just about anyone I can think of to recreate that shooting scene, especially if there are no videos of the event. If there are videos, we get them cleaned up and slowed down. You would be amazed at what shows up on grainy dash cams. I interview everyone and depose every single cop involved in a case. By the time I get to deposing the shooting officers, I know more about the shooting than they do. In Oregon, officers do a post-shooting walkthrough of the shooting. We don't get the transcript or report, but we get pictures or a soundless video. These real-time reconstructions create a much different picture than what officers will ultimately tell at deposition. You have to get them to provide false or misleading information in their deposition. I don't mean to be overly cynical, but my experience at this point is that most officers I have deposed have lied, or can't remember a lot of information. For example, I have a shooting case now where 2 officers chased an unarmed young man into a darkened cul-de-sac and shot him 12 times, claiming he whirled on them after a fast-foot chase with 2 knives, blades extended, and lunged at them. All the shell cases from their weapons were over 25 feet in the opposite direction from where they claimed they were standing. The young man had been seen running with a cell phone moments before the shooting, and one officer claimed he never saw the knives. Furthermore, the officers were left alone at the crime scene by themselves for almost 15 minutes and sent other officers away while they moved around the scene. Neighbors saw them moving the body and bending over the scene. The entire contents of the decedent's pockets were strewn on the ground, and every single one of the 10 first responders, including the shooting officer, denied removing anything from the pockets. As my client's father said, what these things just magically flew out of his pockets while he's being shot to death. And 3 bullets came from the posterior angle, the back. Clearly lies, clearly BS. But I will never get the officers to admit to lying. I can only point out the contradiction in evidence as opposed to their statements. I guess my short answer: I expect them to lie. I spend weeks prepping for their depo, and I just ask straightforward questions trying to get them to tell me a made-up story. I once heard a prison nurse joke about breaking an inmate's wrist if he was too handsy, and about mid-level providers performing black market cosmetic surgeries in prison clinic. How do you prove actions were committed further than hearsay? Have you heard of prisons holding high-value targets without name or trial? Quote, I once heard a prison nurse joke about breaking an inmate's wrist if he was too handsy, and about mid-level providers performing black market cosmetic surgeries in prison clinic. Unquote. I have not heard of black market surgeries in prison clinics. This would cost money, so it would have to be a rich inmate and a competent provider. A unique and very rare combination. However, I have heard of medical experiments done on prisoners. Quote, how do you prove actions were committed further than hearsay? Unquote. This is one of the biggest hurdles in this kind of work. I hire investigators and talk to everybody. Most people are stupid and put everything on the internet, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Those are incredibly valuable exhibits. Ex-spouses are also great sources of information. If people get extra money, they'll spend it on toys, so we do financial analysis. Most prisons have electronic tracking of prisoners and staff, so we get those records. Most prisons are videotaped in every part of the prison. We send spoliation letters immediately to get those videos, and if the videos are destroyed it can be good for our case. As with police, corrections officials won't snitch on each other. There's really no difference between correction officials and prisoners, they all live by the criminal code. And consequently you can't get prisoners to snitch on a cop either, there's too much retribution involved. In a medical case you have medical records and probably not too much else. Quote, have you heard of prisons holding high-value targets without name or trial? Unquote. I have not heard of this at the state or county level. Rumor has it that the feds do it. Thank you for posting your AMA. I have 2 questions, and I've tried to leave them open to your interpretation. 1. What are the top 3 civil rights with which you are most passionate to fight for, and why? 2. What's the number 1 change you would make to the system, if you had the choice? Top 3 civil rights issues I'm passionate about. 1. Oddly, police shooting cases. I'm drawn to these because of the deep, profound importance of what this means to our society. As I noted in a previous comment, police officers are usually less than candid about these cases. I believe everyone has the right to know how these shootings take place. And we have the right to know about the officers who shoot people. These cases are complicated, fraught with emotion, and are usually politically charged. What better way for a cantankerous old lady to work out her frustrations? 2. Prison rape and sex abuse cases. I'm drawn to these cases for many of the same reasons I outlined above. But, on top of the importance of the issues, I believe that vulnerable people who are incarcerated deserve and need greater levels of protection. I represent mostly women who are survivors of lifelong sex abuse, sex trafficking, or child porn and find themselves in prison believing that prison is the safest place they've ever been. Think about that. And then these women are raped by prison officials and have no way of reporting it and receive no treatment for it. These cases I do for my soul. 3. Prison medical cases. These cases are tough. I find it particularly repugnant that prison doctors and medical personnel will deny essential and life-saving medical care to prisoners. This can often lead to death or irrecoverable damage. And the sheer indifference to suffering by prisoners is mind-boggling. I don't make a lot of money on these cases, but I feel like I'm saving lives and making a difference. My number 1 change: more transparency and accountability. Everything in these cases is done by the government, who try to hide and disguise what happened. This is our government, they should be accountable to us. They should have to explain why they do these things and how they do it. I'm a little extreme on solutions. I believe police officers should have to undergo psych evals and have at least a 2-year college degree. I believe that all officers, to work the streets, should have mandatory body cams that are always on. If the camera gets turned off, there should be mandatory disciplinary action. I believe that police unions are one of the biggest culprits behind our police culture today, and if there was a legal way to get rid of them, I would do it.